Hi, we're here today with Jeff and Kay Callin. Another one of our veteran interviews. Jeff, you were in the Army. When'd you go in?
Well, right out of high school, I went to the Service Academy, West Point, and then from there, at 22, was commissioned into the infantry. So, the infantry was kind of an interesting detour in my overall plan, I think. They rank you in your class by academic standing at West Point, and based off of your class rank, you get to choose what branch of service you go into, whether it's aviation or armor or infantry or whatever. The top 2% of a class are allowed to go straight into medical school, and then the rest have to serve some time before they can then apply and be accepted into a medical school. And that was always my goal. They got all the infantry people together at West Point in an auditorium, and then again by class rank, they had all the possible assignments up on a chalkboard, and as they start with the top man, he says, "I want that one." They would go up and erase one of the marks and say, "Okay." And then it got down to me, and there were a couple of places left that weren't very desirable. One of them was Fort Irwin. And the rule was when they call your name, you had to stand up and tell them where you wanted to go within 10 seconds, or your card got put at the bottom of the pile and you got what was left. So they get down and they yell, "Callin!" And I stand up and I said, "Send me to Fort Irwin." And they said, "You still have 8 seconds. But that was an interesting assignment. That was back in the Cold War days. And we were using old Vietnam era equipment and some actual Soviet equipment that had been captured in the Middle East. And we were the bad guys for all of the big maneuvers. So I wore a Russian style uniform. We used Russian style tactics. And we were out in the desert, in the Mojave Desert, probably 220 days a year fighting. It's the Army's version of laser tag. And so we got very, very good at what we were doing. And then from there, I got sent back to Georgia and resigned to go to graduate school because I'd been turned down several times for medical school at that point. I was bottom quarter of my class, 2.34 grade average. You don't even get a polite reply. So I figured, okay, a master's degree will help me out. So off I go to Texas A&M because my buddy who had been out there with me was back at A&M and said, "Jeff, you got to come check out the school." So went there. During my first semester there, I met Kay. We were in a undergraduate class, but both of us were graduate students. And it was we sat up there and kind of poked fun at some of the stupid questions that some of the sorority girls were asking. After the professor says something and then they ask a question that's just exactly what he just said. And after a while, we just, kind of clicked. And during that time, I was in the National Guard. It got me in-state tuition, and it was actually kind of nice to have the income. At that point, I was a captain. So that was my second branch because it was an armor unit over in Bryan. And then we made a deal when we graduated. The one with the best job, the other one follows. Well, I applied to medical school in Bethesda, and she applied for a job with the Ag Department in Washington, D.C. She got the job. I didn't get into school. So off we go to Washington, D.C. And I spent one spring unloading ball and burlap trees from semis into a nursery. And then the next year I was unloading trucks at Sam's Club on the loading dock, and finally got accepted. And that was a relief because I was tired of doing some of those other jobs. So I got into the medical school in Bethesda, Uniformed Services University. They basically train doctors for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Public Health Service. And since the Navy serves the Marines, the Navy can go either way. And there's about 200, 178, 179 in each class. So a good sized class going through.
Is that right there at Walter Reed?
It is where Walter Reed is now.
Oh,
It used to be a National Naval Medical Center. and on that same installation was the medical school. And it's a DoD asset because they train doctors for all the services. Probably one of the finest medical schools out there, because when you go to University of California, you're trained to practice medicine in California. You go to University of Texas, Texas A&M, you're trained to practice medicine in Texas. And at this school, you are trained to practice medicine in all the nasty places that soldiers get sent. So you're trained to practice medicine in the world. And we had the finest parasitology classes and other just weird things that you don't have in the United States. But and I can remember sitting there in class going, yeah, when am I ever going to see this? Fateful words, because in Kosovo, I'll be doggone if one of those diseases didn't come up. And in Egypt, one of those diseases came up, and I was equipped very well to diagnose and treat it because I'd had that training, where somebody else wouldn't have gotten that. So, and then from there, initially I thought I wanted to be a surgeon. So we went for internship to Hawaii, to Tripler. And then Kay was transferred out there from the ag department. They had an office there in Honolulu. And we spent a year living on the beach she spent a year living on the beach. I spent a year in the hospital learning surgery. And I quickly discovered that some of the stuff I really loved, the little stuff. I was not a big fan of doing these major procedures that they all ooh and ah over, and I'm thinking, that's not fun. That's scary. Yeah. And at that point, I was wooed by the orthopedic people to look at their specialty. So there were 11 interns, and there were 3 positions for the second year slot. So everybody else had to go out and serve what we call a general medical officer tour, meaning you're a licensed physician, but you don't have a specialty yet. You haven't been through a residency. And so off we go to Germany. And we were there
3 years.
3 years. The first year we lived in a village with 5 houses and 7 barns. And it was just a very quaint little, there was no bakery, there was no Metzgerei or meat market. That was all in the next village up, which was slightly bigger. Mm-hmm. And then we moved onto the base right before I deployed to Kosovo. And I think at that point, Morgan had been born, and I know that when I left, she was crawling, and when I got back 7 months later, she was walking and talking, and so that was kind of an adjustment. And we loved Germany. I mean, we would still have been there, I think, if they didn't say, you got to come back to the States and get more training, or you're not getting promoted. And if you don't get promoted, you're out. So we came back. They were going to send us to a chemical munitions disposal plant in Umatilla, Oregon. And Kay mentioned something to the colonel's wife, and she goes, "Oh, no. They are not sending those 2 baby girls to a place like that."
And mind you, we already had orders in hand. Mm-hmm. I mean, orders were cut, and when orders are cut, that's where you're going. And when she asked me where we were going, and I said, "Oh my gosh, they're sending us," she said, "Oh, no." And so literally 2 days later, those orders had been rescinded, and we were going to San Antonio. Yeah. So when people tell you about the power of the Spouses Network, it's a real thing.
Yeah. And when you need help, the colonel's wife is very helpful if you're on the good list.
Yeah. And for us, that was definitely one of those, that God had a hand in it. Because
well, we got to San Antonio, and shortly thereafter, her dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. I mean, that very, very far along. And so that allowed her to be in close proximity. They lived down south of Houston. So she was able to make multiple trips and spend what time he had left with him. And then when he finally passed, she was able to be there and do whatever she needed. And the job that I had at that point, I was training invasive cardiovascular technicians, medics that were going on to become cardiac cath technicians, and medics that were going on to become orthopedic technicians, putting traction, doing casts, that kind of stuff. And so my boss basically just said, Jeff, whatever time you need, you take it. And so that was one of those, we were put in the right place at the right time, So, and let's see, where'd we go? Oh, after that, we found that sometimes when you are in the problem box and not in the solved box, high-level people start looking, because during this period while we were out there, they went from people normally going to internship and then going out and serving in the Army and then taking care of soldiers and then coming back and doing residency, to a system where you started internship and you went straight through residency. So you have this cadre of people out here who are not through residency yet, but they're not in a program. So I had applied for another round of orthopedic residency and get turned down. So I get called into the dean of the school there at Fort Sam, and he's, Jeff, sorry to tell you, you didn't make it in this year. What are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm probably going to have to get out to get into a residency because it's just not happening here in the Army. Well, 30 minutes after I leave his office, I get called to see the two-star general, who says, okay, so we have a problem here. You're not in a residency, and we need to get you in a residency. And there's one right here at Brooke Army Medical Center on this same installation. And I said, well, yes, sir, that'd be great. He goes, good, you're going to spend every day over there working with them. I've already called your boss. He just said, yes, sir. And so they get us in there, and somebody resigns, and so the general says he's going in. Well, that's not always helpful, because people resent not being able to make the choice, especially in academia. So it was not a good start to a residency. And eventually I found that, despite really loving that, I wasn't as good at it as I probably needed to be. And so, again, I think maybe being blessed with that insight to say, I love it, but I'm not a good fit. Because I'd already discovered that what I really loved was taking care of soldiers. Being out there in the muddy boots Army, not the clean lab coat medical center Army. And so I made a few calls to the assignments folks, and they said, well, we can send you, they said, you got two choices, Fort Benning or Fort Stewart. And I said, well, I've never been to Fort Stewart. And then literally 72 hours later, I had orders in hand where you're going to Fort Stewart. And as I'm going is when we're invading Iraq. I get to Fort Stewart 3 days after they've begun the invasion, and immediately got everything all set. I was checked off, had all my uniforms ready, and I said, okay, I'm ready to go, send me forward. And they said, no, just stay there, do sick call, we'll be back eventually. And this was a period when if you were guard or reserve and you didn't meet the medical requirements, they didn't just demobilize you and send you home, you got stuck at that base. So there were about 700 guard and reserve stuck at this base that were not medically qualified to deploy, but all their supervisors and everybody had already gone on. So there's nobody watching these people. And anytime there was a work detail, I'd get to the clinic that morning and there'd be a line of 300 people down the sidewalk and around, because it was easier to go on sick call than it was to go out and collect trash or do whatever. So that was kind of a challenging time. And I had gone to a couple of the family medicine, because it's primary care. It's much easier to stay with the Muddy Boots Army, taking care of the soldiers, than it is if you're a surgical specialty or something that has to be in a hospital. So I went down to a couple of the nearby programs. Two of them were Navy. They were down in Florida. And the first one said, well, our program's as good as the one at Fort Benning. And the other guy said, well, we had the people at Fort Benning come and help us set up this program when we got it going. And I thought, all right, I got to go to Fort Benning. If that's the one, if that's the gold standard, let's go look. And I walk in the door, and it's one of my West Point classmates. It's a program director. And he basically just said, Jeff, if you want in, you're in. You know. So I broke the rules. I wasn't allowed to apply for at least until after the first full year at Fort Stewart, but I applied immediately, got the acceptance, and then they had to walk down the hallway and get somebody to waiver the time requirement, but got in. That was a really, really good run. I spent about almost 2.5 years there because they gave me credit for all my academic time of things I'd already done, part of orthopedics, and basically I didn't have to do anything surgical because I'd already validated that I'm trained with that. So I just spent a lot of time doing internal medicine, a lot of time, pediatrics, all the medicine specialties, ICU, in hospital medicine. And we get to the end of that, and I'm going, okay, guys, I'm an Army doctor. We have a war going on. I need to go. And the guy goes, well, I can't get you to Iraq. And I was like, come on. There's a war going on. You need doctors. People are getting hurt. And you're telling me you can't get me to the war? And he goes, well, the closest I can get you is the Sinai. And that's a small multinational peacekeeping force that sits between Egypt and Israel, right along the border of Israel and the Sinai Peninsula. And I thought, okay, if this is the closest you can get me, I'll take it. And he was just like, cha-ching, filled the slot that nobody wanted. So I went over there, and to this day I have friends in Australia, New Zealand, Colombia, Hungary, because everybody there, you're stuck in these two little bases, 3/4 of a mile by a mile and a quarter, and every day, all day, you're involved in the whole thing, watching both sides to make sure nobody messes up the peace treaty. And so you become very, very tight. These are your drinking buddies. These are the folks you go out in the evenings and have a few beers. And to this day, I'm talking to folks all over the world, on Facebook about what they're doing that I met there.
I'm going to guess that was not a deployment you made with him.
That is correct.
But it was one of those opportunities. They sent me along with some soldiers to do one of these 3 days Holy Land tours. It was the chaplain from the Puerto Rican Guard unit set up this thing. And it was one of those, get on the bus, get off the bus, get on the bus, get off the bus. So we get on the bus and we go zipping over, and we go straight up to this place north of Tel Aviv. And it is the site of one of Herod's palaces, the ruins. There's a Roman amphitheater there, and that is supposedly the site where the first non-Jewish convert to Christianity was made. It was a Roman officer. Beautiful place. I mean, right on the sea. There were people fishing in the surf. And then we went from there up to Nazareth, and they have this massive basilica built over the top of an excavation, and they say, that's where they lived. That's Joseph and Mary. That's where they lived. And I was like, okay. Not feeling it, but okay. And then we drove down to through Cana. We didn't get to stop in Cana. We drove down to this town on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. I think it's Caesarea. It's middle of the western side of the Sea of Galilee. Because we were not allowed in the area on the east side, or what's called the West Bank. Spent the night there, got on a boat the next morning, and they took us up to the north end, and we get off the boat and we go up to where they say the Sermon on the Mount took place, and there's a huge convent there. Very pretty, very picturesque, and again, I'm not feeling it, Then they bus us down to where they say the multiplication of loaves and fishes took place. And this is a nice rustic little church, mosaic floors, very rustic iron, welded iron stations of the cross. And that place had some feeling to it. You could feel that there was something there, and for me, that was much more of an interesting and moving sight. And then they bussed us to Capernaum. I'm not sure. I use the glottal stop, so I call it Capernaum. And they took us to, again, they say this is the site where they lived. And then they had the ruins of the synagogue where Christ taught the elders. And you go and you sit there, and that is a place of power. You can feel something. You can feel energy there, or at least I could. And it was probably one of the more moving moments of that whole trip, I think, for me. And I'm really, I'm sad that Kay never got to go see that, because she was, that wasn't part of the trip when she did come over there. And then we went down to the old walled city of Jerusalem and the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre. And apparently, Holy Roman Emperor Constantine had sent his mother Helen there to find the sites. And again, it's one of those where, okay, St. Helen said, this is it, but I'm not feeling it. To me, it was just too trite. It was, here you have this little chapel that's up, 10, 15 feet above the rest of it. And they said, that's Golgotha right there. That's where it was. And see, if you go down here, you can see the crack in the rock. And then they had this stone slab. And they said, this is where they laid him out and prepared him for burial. And, and no shots taken at the folks, because there were folks from Eastern Europe in there. This was probably their trip of a lifetime, and they were having a religious moment. They were, for a lot of folks, this was a very, very fulfilling thing. But I felt nothing there. And then you go down through the various parts of the building and you come to what they say was the tomb. And again, it was this little structure in the middle of this big, huge church, and you're going, okay, if you say so. But I think, having now had that opportunity to walk the grounds of several of the places, a lot of the stories that we hear, from the scripture, they're not just stories anymore. I've been there, I've walked the ground, I can feel it. And I still hope we get to go back. One of the things she was able to do during my, that was a 1-year unaccompanied tour. About halfway through, I flew her into Cairo, and we get down there and we go and have a tour, and we see all 25 pyramids around the Cairo area. Mm-hmm. And then we flew down to Aswan, mm-hmm. where the big dam is, and cruised down the Nile on these river, like floating hotels kind of thing. And we got to see all the ruins all the way down, and then do the bazaar, and then flew back home for a couple of weeks so that the girls would get to see me. Because they would have been irritated, I think, if mom got to go on a trip and they didn't. But who gets to do that, It was just an amazing opportunity for us to see something because of where I got sent.
Yeah, it would have been great if we could have taken the girls, but at that time, things were pretty unstable, and there had been a lot of kidnappings of American children, and so I was like, I don't think that's something I would be comfortable with. So that was
it was just not a good place for young girls.
Yeah,
at the time. So coming back, it was probably one of the more traumatic moves of our career. I had to leave the Sinai 1 year and 1 day after I got there. So that was going to be the 17th of December. Well, I didn't get orders until like the 27th of November telling me I was coming to Fort Hood. So I had to leave the Sinai 17th of December, get back to Georgia, get the house ready to sell, pick the kids up, basically rip them out of school, drive to Texas over Christmas, and get them enrolled in school and find a place to live in the Fort Hood area. And that one was rough on all of us. Yeah. And that was one of those where, we get here, and Alyssa, our oldest, was 11, and that was going to be her 8th address. And, you feel like the worst parent in the world. And, she took her to school and said, hey, it's the Belton Tigers, you want a t-shirt? And Alyssa looks at her and goes, what's the point, Mom? I'm not going to graduate from here anyway. And so you think,
stab in the heart.
Yeah. So, I said, look, I will not move you again unless you say it's okay, and that came back to haunt me a while later. So I go to we spend a year training up. So even though I was here, it's like I wasn't here because we were always training up. Then we go to Iraq for a year, and then come back, and they have me take a job because you only get a very narrow window to be the division surgeon. You get a 2-year run, and then it's somebody else's turn. And so they basically took all of the readiness and deployment related stuff on the installation that was under the hospital, and they made a department and said, we need somebody who understands readiness and deployment, and you're it. So I take this and I walk in, and this is the group of people that 4 months earlier had been shot up by Hassan when he went in there and started blazing away and killing people. And they were, this was a demoralized group of people. They just weren't, they had psychologists coming in every Friday to help a lot of them deal with, the trauma of having been in there when all the people they knew had been killed and all that. And I looked at the, brand new, department administrator I had, and he's an old medic first sergeant. And I said, you know what? We need them to understand that they're still important. So we're going to do a cookout, and we're going to do it, and they're just going to come eat. And so, he gets his barbecue, I get my barbecue. We pull up next to the building. I talk to the armed security guards, and I say, okay, we're going to open this back door. One of you want to stand right here to make sure everything's cool. And we just told the folks, hey, lunch is on us. And so we had burgers and hot dogs, and I think you had brownies or something, and nothing big. But all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, they're saying, hey, let's do a potluck in the break room next Wednesday. And so they start kind of coming together again. And I think it was because somebody was able to just say, you matter, and, you're worth the effort. And so I did that for about 18 months or so. Mm-hmm. And then they had a hospital deploying out of Colorado, a combat support hospital that was going to go to Afghanistan. And they needed a chief of the medical staff for it. So I said, I'll go. I haven't been to Afghanistan yet. And so we go and get zipping up there, and we were down in kind of one of the hotbeds down in the Helmand province, right along the Helmand River, where most of the world's opium is grown, and a lot of drug-related violence kind of stuff. And we're in this base that used to be an old Russian airfield, I guess, from when they had invaded, years and years and years before. And our section had basically everything west of there over to the border with Iran. And we had all these little surgical teams out at these different bases. And I was there, I think, during my second month there, I got promoted to colonel. That was my second promotion during a deployment, because when I went to Kosovo, I went from captain to major.
But at least this one, they had figured out the whole video teleconferencing thing, so we were able to go into the general's suite at Fort Hood, and they had set up this whole video conference, so we actually got to see it. So. Yeah.
It was cool. The guy who was acting hospital commander was another muddy boots kind of guy. And, my boss over in Afghanistan had called back and said, hey, we need to set up a VTC link so that we can have this. And their IT guy said, well, there's only one little terminal in the vault here in the hospital. And the commander goes, oh, no. You're going to go across to that, that Corps headquarters over there, and you're going to find a room where they can actually go in there and see it on a big screen. And the guy's like, oh, so off he goes. And they had it all set up, it was kind of nice.
It was interesting though. It was kind of a little intimidating for the girls, because it's basically, you can bring in no personal items, no electronic devices. You come, they basically not strip search you, but it's pretty darn close, and you just sit there with your hands on the table, and and you just pay very close attention to what they tell you.
Yeah, and that was cool. But then, then they sent me off on a special project, and up in north of Kabul. There was a big air base there, and especially with all the stuff that's happened lately, you kind of look at, wow, I was there, and I thought we were doing good stuff, and now it's gone, just gone. There's bad guys driving around all over there now. And during that time, I was told, you've been selected to be the next senior medical officer for the 3-star general out at Fort Lewis, or Seattle-Tacoma area. So instead of spending a year with the hospital there, they yanked me 6 months early and sent me back, and then I went out. And that job was basically selling the brand to the Pacific Rim. The 3-star that was there, we engaged all of the nations around the Pacific Rim. There was a 2-star medical officer there. He basically was in charge of everything west of the Mississippi for the Army Medical Department. And they were having a huge military medical conference in Seoul. And he said, Jeff, I want you there because you're with the general who owns all these neat, assets because we had a medical brigade there that had a blood detachment. We had, all these different highly specialized medical units that were deployable. And for a country, say, one of the nations there, I forget whether it was Cambodia or Laos or one of those, said, our military sets the medical standard for our nation. We want a safe blood supply. We want our blood supply to do it, and we want to do what the United States does. And if we do it, our country will benefit from it. And I said, I have a blood detachment. These are the guys who run our blood banking and do all this stuff. All you have to do is go to the embassy and say, we want a cooperative military training exercise. And you will have guys going, pick me, I want to go. And so we did that with maybe 6-8 countries. The general would be there, he'd be talking to their senior medical rep. One of them, Bangladesh, the guy goes, every year we have disasters. He goes, medical disasters, weather disasters. He goes, we need help planning. We want to know how you plan and prepare for things, contingency stuff. And the general looks over and I said, we have got medical planners and operators right now, probably in the hallway going, I want to go. So that was a very rewarding trip, I think. I got to make a lot of neat new contacts over there. Got to go to Australia. Again, my career has been so blessed. And then the last one, we got to go do a cooperative exercise with the Japanese. And we were on the northern island, Hokkaido. And it was a whole, scenario of what if the northern islands get invaded, whether that's Russia or China, it didn't matter. It was just the bad guys, And that one was kind of neat because we got to work with them. Their whole structure is different. They don't have the same medical evacuation system we do. They utilize their host nation facilities, their civilian facilities. They just basically take them over. And that was a very neat exercise. And then, shortly, not very far after that, it was time to retire and come back to Texas. So, and that was a hard run. I left there at midnight with a truck and a trailer with everything I had up there in it. I got as far as, was it Fort Laramie, right outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming, by about 10 o'clock that night. So that was a good 22-hour run there. And then the next day I got up I was on the road at 6 and I got here to Temple at 10 that evening. And the next morning got up and got to see Alyssa run her final cross-country meet in high school. So, that's the whole career.
So as you look back, sounds like there were lots of highs and lots of really fun. Let me ask you about the lows for a moment.
Of course, nothing ever breaks when he's home. No medical emergencies ever happened when he was home. Mm-hmm. Every time that either child ever needed to go to the hospital, It was when he was deployed or gone. So the running joke was always, what's the point of having a doctor in the family if he's not here when you need him? So, but yeah, so there was a lot. Thankfully, my mom was around a lot and she helped a lot. But yeah, we did learn when we would have, when we were able to do calls, Skype calls or whatever, I would have to preface it. I would say, okay, I'm just going to be venting. I don't need you to solve the problem, because immediately when I would tell him, oh, the refrigerator quit working, I'm going to have to go buy a new refrigerator, or I need new tires for the car, he was immediately going into problem solving mode. And I'm like, no, it's handled. I'm just telling you that this is, so that was our thing. We just had to say, okay, I don't need you to solve any problems. I'm just telling you what has happened. So,
Yeah. And I've heard that from more than one person who's been deployed multiple times, is that, you don't start giving tasks to the person back home necessarily, or giving direction. Sometimes you just need to close your mouth and open your ears and then say, okay, what do you need me to do? And if the answer is nothing, then you listen, and that's kind of the best thing you can do. Mm-hmm. Just provide that, validation that, yep, I understand what you went through. Sorry I'm not there, but I understand. Yeah.
And there were plenty of those, but
Yeah.
And we, when he was talking about the move from Georgia to Fort Hood was one of the hardest moves, because literally it was, the kids had to start school January in the middle of the school year. The house was for sale, and we ended up renting a house here, and like half the size, so none of our furniture fit, and so it's like I had half the stuff in storage, half in a garage where we couldn't park the car, and trying to get the kids settled in school, and then he was basically just working all the time. And then we ended up buying our current house in December of that year, and then he deployed in January. So basically it was, when we moved into our house, we had no garage, so I had a garage built. The next deployment, I had the shop building built.
Yeah, we had
the kitchen remodeled.
Yeah.
So all of this was,
And all in the middle of that, once we got here to Texas, we had purchased a house on the Bolivar Peninsula down east of Galveston. Well, it gets to be about 3 months before it's time for me to get on the airplane to go to Iraq, and Ike rolls through and destroys the property. The house wasn't wrecked. The house was gone. It was surreal. It was, we had one of those barbecue grills, because we used to rent it out to families for their vacation. There was one of those barbecue grills like you have in the park, heavy welded metal. And I had 2 80-pound sacks of concrete at the base of this thing to keep it steady. That thing, the tides had pushed it over until it got caught in the remnants of the chain link fence. Otherwise, that would have been gone. 120 pounds, 160 pounds of concrete plus the steel. That's the force of a hurricane. So and she had to deal with the whole insurance, and then we couldn't rebuild because the state changed some boundaries, and it was, but she got it all done.
Yeah, that was probably one of the things, I guess, because he knew he never had to worry about financial stuff. Because, we heard horror stories about people that, the soldier was deployed and, were getting hazardous duty pay and whatever, and thinking that things were being taken care of at home, and then they get back and, no bills have been paid, and ours was just the opposite. Every time he came back, I'm like, okay, we now own this free and clear. We now own this free and clear, so it was, I think from that standpoint, just being the financial manager, I think made him able to do his job without worrying about what was going on at home.
Well, and in 30 years of married life, I think I've written, less than 20 checks. On a good day, I might know where the checkbook is, but I know that I don't have to worry. Just everything gets handled, and we are financially secure because of her management of all the assets.
And I think it was because once we left Hawaii and moved to Germany, that pretty much ended my government career because, couldn't really work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Germany. So basically that's when I became full-time mom, full-time volunteer, all of that. I mean, throughout the years when we moved different places, like I would substitute teach at the kids' schools and, do that kind of, job. But as far as career-wise, it was pretty much done after when we moved. So, but that's okay. I mean, I think it was the right choice for us, just because there was so much change in the kids' life that I was the constant.
Yep. Well, and of course, like your mother before you, she was the neighborhood mom, and teens, tweens and teens that couldn't talk to their own parents would talk to her. It was just and being able to be the one that was there for that instead of having to be off at work while all the stuff was going on, I think was not only a benefit for us and our kids, but it was a benefit for all our kids' friends. And to this day, we have the kids, the girls, their friends will be saying, "Hey, can your mom help me set up a retirement investment account?" This is a kid fresh out of college, getting ready to just, at their first job. And they're hunting her down to say, "Hey, I want to be able to retire and I need to get going on this because Alyssa says it's important." And, she gets them set up.
Yeah,
it's just
true.
Not bad.
Well, and you've launched your daughters well, too.
Yeah.
You have obviously worked well together and built something really good and stable. So we've touched on a couple times when the timing was fortuitous. Do you find that your faith was a help in all through this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. There were times when we got sent, and we're going, "What the heck are we doing here?" Always in retrospect, we've been able to look back and go, that's why we were sent there.
Yep. And that's been pretty much everywhere we've been.
Yeah. I mean, there has been some point, I think, in every place I've been where I have made some, not intervention, but I've performed some act that helped someone, not necessarily got them out of a situation, but provided either an inspiration or an answer that they couldn't get otherwise. And so for that, I'm feeling pretty blessed. It was, I've definitely felt, some higher power moving me, putting me in the right place at the right time to do the right task.
Yeah,
and
we're firm believers of that. I think that we are placed where we are needed at the time we're needed.
Yeah, and it's still happening.
Yeah.
There are still times when, I end up doing something going, how did I get roped into this, and then boom, an opportunity arises to make a positive intervention for someone, and it's all good.
Yeah.
So, words of advice you might want to pass along. If you were to meet a young person in very similar circumstances to what you were in when you were 18, 19, and they were to come to you and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about..."
I would recommend, we used to joke, I didn't go to college, I was institutionalized for 4 years. That's West Point. But I came out of there with a very, very strong understanding of the sciences and no debt. The only debt I owed was years in service in the Army for my education. So I received at least $100,000 worth of education and paid back 5 years, which was okay. I probably would have been in anyway. I mean, my mother knew since I was 2 that I was going to be military. She's just thankful I wasn't a Marine. And that's nothing bad against the Marines. I love Marines. It was just that the Army, I think, is where I needed to be. It's just, when I got to Texas, I got in the Guard, got in-state tuition. That helped tremendously with being able to get a master's. the monthly pay I got from the National Guard for going, on the weekend drills paid for my room and board, pretty much, along with a, manual labor job. And then went to medical school, again, Uniformed Services University. You owe time afterward as a military medical doctor in payment for your medical school training. But you graduate with no debt, unless you just take on debt yourself, buying a house or something like that. And so from that aspect, I would tell young people, look at what your service can get you in terms of education, training, life experience, without that debt hanging on the end that will ride you for years and years. And I think there are tremendous opportunities out there. During what they called the surge in Iraq, when we had to have a lot more people on the ground over there because things were heating up. They took and they said, okay, all of you folks that came in after 9/11 that are getting the 9/11 GI Bill benefits, and since I'd had a break in service, I was eligible for that. They said, you're eligible to pass those benefits to your children during this particular window. All you have to do is sign up this week and agree to serve 4 more years, which most of us were going for retirement anyway, and you can pass anywhere between 1 month of benefits or all benefits to one of your designated beneficiaries. So I basically took 36 months of benefits, which is the equivalent of 4 years of college. I gave 18 months to each of the girls, and that that pays your required books, your tuition, and a monthly stipend to live on for those months. And so here our girls graduated debt-free with money in the bank. And in the case of Morgan going out of state, there was another federal law that came out that said if you begin your education with GI Bill benefits, even if they run out, you are entitled to in-state tuition for the remainder of your time. So Morgan spends the first 2 years doing GI Bill and basically banking whatever it is she doesn't need, so it helps pay the next 2 years as well. But she gets in-state tuition even though the other benefits have run out. And that probably saved like $40,000-$50,000 worth of tuition, out-of-state tuition. So again, for the young folks, there's some benefits. There's some dangers too. I mean, there are some people that got killed in military service. There are accidents that happen all the time, but there's accidents that happen walking across the street. So.
And I would say, if you are dating somebody who's in the military, the best advice I could give is just be independent. Because if you are sitting at home waiting for somebody to take care of things for you, you are going to be sadly disappointed and just sad. So I think it takes a strong individual to be married to a military person, just because so much of it you have to figure out on your own, or you have to make the contacts with people. Like when we were in Germany, we created our own family there with our neighbors and other people. And I think you have to be willing to put yourself out there and be there for other people so that they'll be there for you, and to form these connections and not have to rely on just your blood relatives or even your spouse, because they're not always there.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anything you else you feel so moved to say?
Thankful for the opportunity to kind of share our story, and hopefully people will be inspired. If not, sorry guys.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.